Rome, the empire that built roads across continents, aqueducts that still stand today, and an army so feared it could topple kingdoms in a matter of weeks. But for all their engineering genius and battlefield discipline, sometimes they messed up so badly, you wonder how the empire lasted as long as it did. I'm talking about battles lost not to superior enemies, but to arrogance, bad calls, and mistakes so ridiculous you'd expect them in a bad comedy. These are the moments where Rome didn't just lose the fight, they handed victory to the enemy on a silver platter. And trust me, some of these blunders are so unbelievable, you'll be asking yourself, how was this not the day the empire collapsed for good? And while Rome's first blunder cost them an army in the desert, their next mistake would see the enemy walk right through their front door without breaking a sweat. 1. The Battle of Carrhae 53 BCE, the Follow Me disaster. Marcus Licinius Crassus had it all: obscene wealth, political clout, and a reputation as 1/3 of the first triumvirate, alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey. But like many overachievers, he decided that being the richest man in Rome wasn't enough. No, he wanted the military glory of Alexander the Great. So naturally, he picked a fight with the Parthian Empire, a power famous for its horse archers, desert tactics, and the small detail of never having been conquered by Rome before. From the start, Crassus's campaign was like watching someone walk into a trap in slow motion. His Armenian ally, King Artavasdes, begged him to take a safer mountain route where Roman heavy infantry would have the advantage. Crassus instead followed Ariamnes, an ally who just so happened to be working for the Parthians. Ariamnes led the Romans into flat, waterless plains, basically the Parthian home turf, where horses could run circles around Roman formations. The Parthian commander, Surena, brought cavalry armed with powerful composite bows, and because he planned ahead, a caravan of camels carrying extra arrows. While the Romans baked in the sun, the Parthians fired, withdrew, and fired again, staying just out of reach. Crassus refused to break formation or maneuver aggressively, keeping his troops locked in giant squares like human pincushions. His son, Publius, tried to turn the tide with a cavalry charge. Instead, he was surrounded, cut down, and his severed head was paraded in front of the Roman line. Morale collapsed. When Crassus finally agreed to a peace meeting, it was a trap. Accounts say the Parthians killed him on the spot. Legend claims they poured molten gold into his mouth, an unsubtle jab at his greed. Rome lost over 20,000 men, 3 years of military prestige, and learned that charging into the desert against expert horse archers without a plan is a great way to end your career. If losing 20,000 men in the sands wasn't bad enough, the next disaster made Rome look less like a superpower and more like a city that forgot to lock its gates. 2. The Battle of the Allia, 390 BCE, the day the Gauls got the keys to the city. Picture this: it's a warm July day, and the Roman army is facing the Senones, a Gallic tribe led by Brennus. The Romans have numbers, decent weapons, and a defensible position by the river Allia, just north of Rome. All they need to do is hold their ground. Instead, they organize themselves like a football team, where everyone insists on playing a different position. They stretch their lines too thin, trying to match the Gauls man for man. On their left flank, guarding some hills, they placed raw, inexperienced troops, the ancient equivalent of rookies who still needed to be told which end of the spear to hold. Brennus saw this weak point and hit it hard. The Roman left collapsed instantly. Instead of rallying or retreating in good order, the army dissolved into chaos. Some soldiers bolted for the safety of Veii, a nearby city, without even telling Rome what had happened. Others ran straight back to the capital, leading the Gauls right to the front door. Rome's defenders, caught off guard, couldn't muster an adequate defense. The Gauls walked in, looted, burned, and occupied the city. When the Romans finally negotiated for their departure, Brennus placed his sword on the scale with the ransom gold and delivered the immortal line, "Vae victis, woe to the vanquished." This wasn't a case of bad luck or overwhelming enemy brilliance. It was the perfect storm of bad deployment, poor discipline, and a total lack of communication. The Alia became a date so infamous that Romans treated it as cursed for centuries. But getting steamrolled on your own doorstep is nothing compared to what happened when Rome followed a trusted friend into the deadliest forest in Europe. 3. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, 9 CE, marching blind into the woods. Publius Quinctilius Varus had one job: keep Rome's German provinces under control. He had 3 legions, around 15,000 troops, plus auxiliaries, and a local ally in Arminius, a Germanic noble who'd served in the Roman army. Arminius was trusted so completely that when he warned of a minor tribal uprising, Varus agreed to march his men straight through the dense Teutoburg Forest to deal with it. What Varus didn't realize was that Arminius was orchestrating a massive rebellion. Several Germanic tribes had united in secret, and the minor revolt was bait. The forest was a nightmare for Roman tactics. Narrow paths, mud, thick trees blocking formation, and constant rain. Legionaries used to fighting in open fields found themselves strung out in a long, vulnerable column. The Germans attacked from all sides with spears and ambushes, retreating before the Romans could counter. Supply wagons bogged down, morale crumbled. Varus's forces couldn't form their standard defensive squares, and without cavalry mobility, they were essentially marching targets. For 3 days, the legions were whittled down until they were surrounded and destroyed. Varus fell on his sword to avoid capture. The survivors were enslaved or sacrificed in grisly rituals. Rome lost not only 3 legions, but also its appetite for further expansion into Germania. The real mistake wasn't just trusting Arminius, it was marching without scouts, without secure supply lines, and without adjusting tactics for the terrain. It's one thing to lose a battle. It's another to lose an entire army because you walked into an ambush you could have avoided by simply taking a different road. Surprise attacks are bad. Walking into an ambush is worse. But our next emperor didn't need an ambush. He managed to doom himself before the enemy even arrived. 4. The Battle of Adrianople, 378 CE. When the emperor showed up early and alone, by the late 4th century, Rome was no longer the unstoppable juggernaut it once was. The Gothic tribes, pushed into Roman territory by the Huns, were restless, starving, and angry. The Eastern Roman Emperor Valens had an opportunity to coordinate with his Western co-emperor, Gratian, to crush the Goths with overwhelming force. All he had to do was wait a few days for reinforcements. But Valens wanted the glory for himself. Reports claimed the Goths numbered fewer than they actually did, and Valens convinced himself he could win without help. So, without waiting for Gratian, he marched out to meet them near Adrianople, in modern-day Turkey. The Goths were camped with their wagons in a defensive circle. Valens launched a frontal attack before his troops had even fully deployed. The problem? The bulk of the Gothic cavalry led by Fritigern wasn't in camp. They were out foraging, and when they returned mid-battle, they slammed into the Roman flanks with devastating force. The Roman formation collapsed into chaos. Heat, dust, and panic turned the field into a slaughterhouse. Valens himself disappeared in the fighting. Some say he was burned alive in a farmhouse where he'd taken refuge. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army was wiped out. This wasn't just a battlefield loss, it was a political disaster that weakened the empire's borders and morale. And it all came down to impatience and bad intel. Waiting for backup might not be glorious, but it's usually preferable to leading your army into an early grave. If charging in without backup sounds reckless, the next Roman commanders took it one step further. They refused to even fight on the same team. 5. The Battle of Arausio, 100 Slav CE, when Ego killed 80,000 men. In 105 BCE, Rome faced the migrating Cimbri and Teutones tribes in southern Gaul. The Romans had 2 commanders, the proconsul Quintus Servilius Caepio and the consul Gnaeus Mallius Maximus. Instead of working together, they decided to engage in one of history's most lethal pissing contests. Maximus was a new man, a consul from outside the traditional noble families. Caepio, a patrician, thought Maximus was beneath him. They refused to share a camp, coordinate movements, or even communicate effectively. Caepio, determined to claim glory alone, attacked the enemy prematurely, without waiting for Maximus's forces. The Cimbri, a battle-hardened migrating people, didn't just repel Caepio's assault, they smashed his forces and rolled directly into Maximus's camp. With no coordination, the Romans were picked off piecemeal. The result? Around 80,000 Roman soldiers and 40,000 camp followers were killed or enslaved. The sheer scale of the defeat shocked Rome. It was one of the worst military disasters in the Republic's history, rivaling Carrhae. The Senate blamed both commanders, but especially Caepio, whose arrogance and refusal to cooperate directly caused the catastrophe. The moral of the story: when the enemy is united and you're busy arguing over whose tent is bigger, you've already lost. Massacres are one kind of defeat, public humiliation is another, and the next Roman army would learn the hard way that sometimes the enemy doesn't need to kill you to destroy you. 6. The Battle of the Caudine Forks, 321 BCE. The embarrassment, March. Not every Roman disaster was a bloodbath. Some were humiliations so complete that they stuck in the collective memory for centuries. The Caudine Forks incident during the Second Samnite War is a perfect example. The Romans, thinking they could quickly march through the Apennine passes to attack the Samnites, took a route through a narrow mountain defile called the Caudine Forks. They didn't scout ahead. They didn't secure the exit. They just marched right in, only to find the far end blocked by the enemy. When they turned around, they discovered the entrance was also blocked. The Romans were trapped in the valley, with no way to fight their way out. The Samnite commander, Gaius Pontius, had them completely at his mercy. Instead of massacring them, he decided on something far more humiliating. The entire Roman army, consuls, officers, and soldiers, was forced to surrender and pass under the yoke of spears, a ritual symbolizing utter defeat. They had to stoop under the low bar while the Samnites jeered and mocked them. Rome regained its honor in later campaigns, but the Caudine Forks became a byword for military humiliation. It was the ancient equivalent of a champion boxer being forced to walk out of the ring in clown shoes. But as bad as humiliation is, it's still not the same as marching straight into the jaws of the most feared general in ancient history. 7. The Battle of Carrhae, 216 BCE. The textbook on how to get surrounded. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when an army gets too confident, Carrhae is your answer. In the Second Punic War, Rome threw roughly 80,000 men at Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who'd been humiliating them for 2 years. The plan? Overwhelm him with sheer numbers. But Hannibal wasn't just a skilled commander, he was a master manipulator. He deliberately placed his weakest troops in the center and stronger forces on the flanks. As the Romans pushed forward, the Carthaginian center slowly bent back, forming a crescent. The Romans thought they were winning, so they pushed harder. That's when Hannibal's cavalry crushed the Roman cavalry on both wings and then swept behind them, closing the trap. The Romans were packed so tightly they couldn't even swing their swords. It turned into a suffocation chamber. Estimates suggest up to 50,000 Romans died in a single day. The ridiculous mistake? Overconfidence and ignoring Hannibal's track record. Rome knew Hannibal had already outmaneuvered them at Trebia and Lake Trasimene. Charging headlong into a commander famous for baiting traps was like running into a burning building because you saw a chair you liked. Hannibal's trap was legendary, but our next emperor didn't even get that far. He lost the battle before it started by walking into the enemy's tent. 8. The Battle of Edessa, 260 CE, the emperor who got himself kidnapped. During Rome's long list of emperors with questionable decision-making, Valerian stands out for sheer bad luck and bad judgment. Facing the Sassanid Persian king Shapur I, Valerian decided to confront him near Edessa, modern-day Şanlıurfa, Turkey. The Roman army was weakened by plague, supply issues, and low morale. Instead of regrouping or negotiating from a position of strength, Valerian offered to meet Shapur for peace talks. Sounds reasonable, right? Except he brought himself, unescorted, into Shapur's camp. Shapur promptly had him seized. Valerian became the only Roman emperor in history to be taken alive by an enemy. Roman sources claim he was humiliated, used as a human footstool, when Shapur mounted his horse, and possibly executed by being flayed or stuffed with straw as a trophy. The army, leaderless, fell apart. Edessa was lost, and the psychological blow to Rome was immense. The lesson? If you're going to negotiate with someone famous for killing their rivals, maybe don't walk into their tent without a backup plan. But even Caesar's close call wasn't the worst of it. The final blunder on our list ended with an emperor, an entire army, and a swamp that swallowed them whole. 9. The Battle of Abritus, 251 CE, death by swamp. In the mid-3rd century, the Roman Empire was in crisis, multiple frontiers under attack, constant usurpers, and plagues tearing through the population. Emperor Decius marched to confront the Goths in the Balkans. The Goths retreated, drawing Decius into marshy ground near Abritus. Heavy Roman infantry wading through swampy terrain is like trying to sprint through a swimming pool. Mobility collapsed, formations broke, and visibility dropped. To make matters worse, Decius pressed the attack even after his son fighting alongside him was killed. The death of one soldier is not a great loss to the Republic, he reportedly said. Not the most comforting pep talk. Moments later, Decius himself was cut down. His body was never recovered, sinking into the mire along with thousands of his men. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a demoralizing mess. Rome lost an emperor in battle for the first time to foreign enemies, all because he led an entire army into terrain where they couldn't fight effectively. So there you have it. 10 times Rome didn't just lose a battle, they gift-wrapped victory for their enemies and hand-delivered it with a bow on top. From marching blind into deserts and swamps, to letting personal grudges kill tens of thousands, to literally giving the enemy an emperor, these moments prove that even the most powerful empire in the world could be brought down by plain old human error. History loves to remember Rome for its roads, aqueducts, and legions, but these stories, they're the reminder that pride, bad intel, and ignoring advice have been wrecking plans since forever. Which of these mistakes do you think was the most ridiculous? And if you were in command, which one could you have avoided, or would you have ended up in the exact same mess? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed watching Rome's biggest facepalms, hit that like button, subscribe for more history you can't make up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the past's most unbelievable moments. Until then, remember, it's one thing to lose a battle, it's another to make it easy for the other side.